Welcome to the Credit Bank Small Business Spotlight, where we spotlight inspiring business owners, learn their stories, and share what drives their success. This episode is sponsored by Credit Bank, powered by Shield Advisory Group. I'm your host, Irv Cruz, and today I am joined by a very special guest. He is a leadership expert, he's an award-winning speaker, and the author of the best-selling book, 9 Minutes on Monday. Please welcome Mr. James Robbins. James, thank you for joining us.
Irv, my pleasure. Good to be here.
Great. So, James, I want to take you all the way back to how your company all began. What was going on in your life, prior to that, and what inspired you to start jamesrobbins.com and go on that path that you went?
Great question. I sort of followed in the footsteps of John Maxwell. I came out of college and then I ended up being a preacher for a while, which I had no plans of doing, but I did that. I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed helping people. But at the same time, I also felt a bit frustrated because, I'm entrepreneurial and creative, and there's also, a certain money cap that you're ever going to make in ministry. And I had 3 kids and I needed to provide for them. So I began teaching leadership at first in the not-for-profit sector, and then people started asking me to come to their companies, and that sort of just steamrolled into where I was making more money on my side gig than I was as a preacher. And eventually I just pulled the trigger and launched my company.
Yeah, and most, James, most companies, they begin because they're looking to either solve a problem or address a need. So what problem does your company solve, and who do you help the most?
So when you take a company that's got more than one person, now you've got the complexity of people, but everybody's company, their biggest asset is going to be the people that are working there. And the thing about us as human beings is when you think about the massive difference in potential that we might bring to the work force every single day. So for those of you who are listening and you're business owners, your people come to work every day, and think of it in this way: you on your best day, Irv, versus you on your worst day, there's a massive gulf in productivity, in excitement, in energy. And it's no different for our employees that come to work.
Right.
And so what we do is we help leaders lead in a way that helps their people show up to work bringing their best. Because when your people bring their best, then that's when your company, good things happen.
Yeah. And how long have you been doing this, James?
I started teaching leadership in the not-for-profit sector, I guess, back in 2003. Before that, I was always teaching it, but in a church context.
Yeah. And, thus far, what would you say is your proudest moment or your biggest achievement?
I think a big achievement was publishing the book 9 Minutes on Monday. I'm a shy,
imagine.
introverted kid that grew up on a cattle ranch and never thought I would ever do something like that. But I think a big proud moment for me was when John Maxwell and his team invited me to go down to South America with him and teach that leadership framework from my book to over 1,000 business leaders. And it was a surreal moment for me because the first leadership book I'd ever read in my life was a book by John Maxwell. And fast forward, whatever it was, 15, 20 years later, and I'm sitting with him in the green room before we go on stage, and it's just him and I all day training people. And that was just an amazing moment for me.
And when you first started, everybody knows, running a business has its challenges. Okay. So what was one hurdle you encountered at the very beginning, and how did you overcome it?
What no one told me when I started my business was that really I was going into sales, and I hate sales. So you quickly learn that, I've got to go and get clients. So that was an initial hurdle for me. Honestly, if we want to go a little bit deeper,
Sure.
it was a fear of rejection. And I think for many, many entrepreneurs that start a business, there's a certain lonely path you take initially.
Right.
But you also have to churn through a lot of rejection. And depending on, how good you are with that. And for years, I was terrible at that. So I just avoided it. I did more creative things like let me fix my website, let's change the logo again, anything but pick up the phone and get on a call. So that's some of the hard lessons I've had to learn over the years. If you are not selling, then you're losing ground.
So you mentioned earlier that you were an introvert. So what was it inside of you that switched from being an introvert, even having the fear of rejection, excuse me, have some sort of an impact, even from a psychological standpoint? How did you turn that around?
I'm definitely still an introvert, but what changed for me was having to get on stage. So this goes back to my early days as a preacher. I was deathly afraid of public speaking. But then when you are a preacher, you just have to get up multiple times a week in front of audiences and speak. And I was terrified by that and always complaining and worried about how I would look. But I remember one day just saying to myself, could you for once just go and give a presentation and not care what anyone thinks? And I thought, okay, let me just suspend that for a moment.
You just released
And
it.
I did. I actually prepared. Yeah. And I went in there and I was excited and I did my thing. And I was a college student at the time
Right.
and I was only asked to speak for 5 minutes. So it wasn't anything big. But when I got done, a bunch of people came up to me and they said, hey, you should do more of that. That was like the first moment that I thought, like we put all these judgments on ourselves, Irv. I like to think of them like sticky notes, right? The
Yeah.
post-it notes, and
Don't
and
I know
I
it?
yeah, I had it gathered all during my life. Not a public speaker, can't speak in public. I just had them all over. And after that day, they began to come off, not all at once, but I thought,
That's
oh,
interesting.
maybe I can do this, and that really opened the doors.
Yeah, I like that analogy about the sticky notes and peeling them off one at a time. So after that first experience, when it was all over, did you have that sense of like, wow, I did it and I can do it? What was that like for you?
Yeah, that was very freeing and exciting, but the memory is short, right? Until you're asked to do it again a couple months later, and then you're like, "Oh no, here we are again."
And you get back
But
on
this
that
is the
cycle.
thing in life, right? You look back to your past wins, and that's why it's always important to be reflective. Anytime that we go into something, we're able to gather strength from our history. I don't care if you're 21 years
Mm,
old, if you're 16 years old listening to
right.
this. Everyone has a history. It might be that, the time you went into middle school and you got bullied, but you just showed up anyways. It takes a certain amount of resilience. So there's a lot of strength that we can gather just from our own life in our history.
That's actually wonderful, and I thank you for sharing that insight. So going back to when you started your business, when you're starting a business, it requires resources, maybe capital to get the business started. How did you manage that early on?
I started, as a side hustle, right? So I had my job and then I was marketing to go and speak and do workshops on leadership. And the nice thing about that industry is somebody hires you and pays you a few $1,000s. You jump on a plane, go somewhere, you're back the very next day. So it's not like people miss you much at work. So that's how I was able to start. But it doesn't matter what business you're in, you're going to hit some kind of obstacle, black swan events. For me, the first time I really stepped out was a year before 2008, and that was the economy crashed. But it was in that, like nobody was hiring any speakers, no trainers,
Right.
and it was in that moment that I thought, oh, maybe I should start teaching online, and that's when I started doing online events. That's when I started creating courses. We have like I don't know 30 leadership courses by now. So
Hmm.
by the time the pandemic rolled around, 12 years later, I was really set up. A lot of people were scrambling to catch up, but I'd already set myself up for online, and that helped.
That's amazing. And so where do you see your business in the next year or two? Do you have any exciting growth plans or goals that you have in mind that you want to hit?
I have a new book that's coming out in August that it's been 10 years in the making. I'm really excited about that. It's a little departure from leadership. It's more of a personal development book
Okay.
in a fable format. So I am getting ready for that. Like with my last book, we have a program that will go with it
Right.
so that people who read the book, and then if they want more and they want to take steps further, they can jump into the program. And when you write a book, you don't really make much money on the book, but it's what you do with the book to either drive sales, whether that's getting more speeches, having some kind of online digital product that people can take. That's what you want to do.
Amazing. It's been great learning about jamesrobbins.com. Did I get that right?
You got it.
Yeah. And for those wanting to connect with you, James, how would they find you?
JamesRobbins.com. And also, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. If you
Okay.
can't find my LinkedIn, go to my website and track me down there.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, James, for sharing your story with us today. To our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and tune in for more inspiring business spotlights. Until then, I'm your host, Irv Cruz, and we'll see you on the next Credit Bank Small Business Spotlight. If you enjoyed this video, click here to watch another exciting episode.